It was the kind of night no one remembers, uneventful, ordinary. A soft breeze barely rustled the trees. The city moved at its usual pace, cars humming in the distance, lives unfolding behind closed doors. And yet, in one corner of Houston, something was happening that no one could see. An 18-year-old girl, young, vibrant, with a future waiting for her, was taking her final steps. Maybe she knew something wasn't right. Maybe she felt it in the way the silence pressed against her skin. Or maybe she never had a chance to feel anything at all. Hours later, her body would be found, too soon for the person responsible, too late for her to be saved. The scene told a story, but not the whole truth. Blood spattered where it shouldn't be, a shoe left just out of reach, a single piece of jewelry still clutched in her hand. Detectives had seen cases like this before, but as they dug deeper, the familiar turned into something else entirely. Because the last person seen with her wasn't a stranger lurking in the dark. It was a man whose face was known to many, whose words had filled church pews, whose voice had comforted those in pain. A man who stood before a congregation every Sunday, preaching about faith, trust, redemption. What led him here? What drove him to this moment? And more importantly, what was he so desperate to keep from the world? This story isn't just about a crime. It's about the truths people refuse to see, the deception hidden behind closed doors, and the terrifying lengths some will go to in order to protect themselves. Stay with me, because once you hear what really happened, you won't forget it. It started as just another night, the kind that blurs into the background unnoticed. Streetlights hummed overhead, the city breathed in its usual rhythm, and somewhere in Houston, an 18-year-old girl was living the last moments of her life. Maybe she knew something felt off. Maybe she had seconds to react before everything went dark. Or maybe she never saw it coming at all. She had dreams, plans, people who loved her. And yet, within hours, her name would be written on a police report, her body left in a place meant to erase her from existence. But she was found, sooner than expected. Too soon for the one who put her there. The crime scene was more than just a tragedy. There was something else, the way she was positioned. The small, seemingly insignificant details that didn't add up. It didn't feel random. And as investigators picked apart the truth, they uncovered something far worse than they ever anticipated. Because the man who last saw her wasn't a faceless stranger lurking in the dark. He was someone trusted, respected. A man who stood in front of crowds every week, his voice steady, his presence commanding. A leader, a mentor, a man of God. And now he was at the center of a crime that no one was supposed to uncover. The evidence didn't just suggest a brutal act of violence. It hinted at something planned, concealed, desperate. A secret buried deep beneath years of carefully constructed lies. What was he hiding? And how far would he go to make sure no one ever found out? Today we're looking at the tragic case of Emily, an 18-year-old woman who was brutally murdered in what first appeared to be a random act of violence. But as investigators peeled back the layers, what they found was far more shocking. A hidden affair, a desperate cover-up, and a betrayal so calculated, so deeply entangled in deception, that even those closest to the truth refused to believe it. Stay until the end, because the final twist in this case will leave you speechless. Some nights pass without a second thought, uneventful, ordinary, slipping into the background of a city that never stops moving. But then, there are nights that leave a scar, nights that begin like any other and end with flashing sirens, unanswered questions, and a truth so disturbing it refuses to stay buried. For one 18-year-old girl, this night should have been like all the rest. Maybe she was heading home. Maybe she was meeting someone she trusted. Maybe she never saw the danger standing right in front of her. She was found too soon. Not where she was supposed to be. Not how anyone should be. The evidence left behind painted a picture of chaos, signs of a struggle, objects knocked over, the kind of mess that told investigators she fought for her life. But something didn't fit. This wasn't just violence. There was intent. A message left in the way she was positioned, in the things that were taken, and the things that were left behind. And then came the real question. Who would want her dead? And why? The answer would lead detectives to a place no one expected, to a man who had built his entire life on trust, on faith, on the image of someone who could do no wrong. A man who stood in front of a congregation every Sunday, speaking of right and wrong, good and evil. But in the end, the truth had a way of surfacing, and what lay beneath wasn't faith, it wasn't redemption, it was something else entirely. Stay with me, because once you hear what really happened, you'll never look at this case the same way again. It was a warm evening in Houston when police received a frantic 911 call. A body had been found near Houston. The caller's voice was shaky, barely holding it together. Moments later, officers arrived, their flashing lights cutting through the darkness, illuminating a scene that no one could have prepared for. The victim, an 18-year-old woman, lay motionless. Multiple stab wounds, defensive marks on her hands, blood stains the pavement. Nearby, a purse had been emptied, its contents scattered. A broken phone screen glowed faintly in the dark. It looked like a robbery gone wrong, a tragic but familiar crime, until detectives noticed something that didn't belong. It wasn't what was missing, but what had been left behind. Something deliberate, something placed with intention. And just like that, this wasn't a simple case anymore. Emily was young, full of life, and had dreams bigger than the city she called home. She was the kind of person people gravitated toward, kind, ambitious, always looking ahead to the next chapter in her life. Friends described her as someone who could brighten a room just by walking in. She was close to her family, passionate about her future, and full of plans she was eager to see through. But what no one knew, what even those closest to her could never have imagined, was that she was carrying a secret that, whether she knew it or not, had placed her in the path of danger. It started subtly, the way these things always do. Little moments that didn't seem important at the time, a new acquaintance, a sudden change in behavior, a growing sense of unease that no one could quite put their finger on. Had she confided in someone? Had she sensed the walls closing in before it was too late? Those who knew her best would later say there were no clear signs, no obvious warnings. But looking back, maybe there were. Maybe the truth had been hidden in plain sight all along. She had her whole life ahead of her, but someone had decided that the future would never come. James, a man who, to the outside world, embodied everything a leader should be, respected, charismatic, a voice of wisdom for those who sought guidance. Week after week he stood before his congregation, preaching about faith, morality, and righteousness. People trusted him. They confided in him. But behind closed doors, he wasn't the man he pretended to be. At first there were whispers, the kind people dismissed it as nothing more than gossip, the kind no one wanted to believe, because how could it be true? A man so devoted to his faith, his family, his reputation, surely these were just rumors. But rumors have a way of leading to something real, and investigators soon discovered that Pastor James had secrets, secrets he couldn't afford to let slip. He was living a double life, a hidden affair, a relationship that should have never existed, and he was desperate to keep it from coming to light. The deeper detectives looked, the clearer it became. This wasn't just an indiscretion. This was something more, something dangerous. And then came the question that changed everything. Just how far would he go to make sure no one ever found out? The shocking truth. This wasn't just an affair. This was betrayal at the deepest level. Pastor James wasn't sneaking around with a stranger. He was sleeping with his close friend's wife. A secret so dangerous, so devastating, that if it ever got out, it would ruin everything he had spent years building. And then There was Emily. How did she find out? Maybe she overheard something she wasn't supposed to. Maybe she saw a message, a glance, a moment that didn't add up. Maybe she confronted him, thinking she could hold this information over him, not realizing the danger she was stepping into. But one thing became clear. She became a problem that needed to be dealt with. Could she have threatened to expose the truth? Did she think she had power over him, that she could force him to come clean? Or did she simply know too much? Because within days of uncovering his secret, she was dead. Coincidence, or something far more deliberate? As detectives dug deeper, the web of lies began to unravel. The pastor's story, once so carefully constructed, started to fall apart under scrutiny. Where was he on the night of the murder? What could he tell investigators about his whereabouts when victim's name was last seen? And who exactly was the last person to see her alive? With each new lead, the case grew darker. The pastor's answers didn't match up with the facts. His alibi was full of holes, too many for a man with nothing to hide. And then, just when it seemed like there might be no way forward, police made a shocking discovery. A piece of evidence that would change everything. Forensic testing revealed something chilling, something that tied the pastor directly to the crime scene. His fingerprints on the victim's personal belongings. A trace of DNA on the clothes she had been wearing. There was no denying it anymore. The man who preached to his congregation about truth and redemption had been hiding a much darker reality. But the biggest question remained. Was he acting alone? Or was there someone else involved in this twisted web of lies and betrayal? The trial that followed was nothing short of explosive. For weeks, the prosecution painted a damning picture of Pastor James, a man who had built a life around lies, deception, and a carefully orchestrated double life. The charges were grave, and the evidence was undeniable. Witnesses took the stand, their testimonies shedding light on the secret affair that had spiraled out of control. They spoke of the pastor's manipulative behavior, the lengths he had gone to in order to cover up his illicit relationship, and the dangerous consequences of trying to keep a life of lies intact. But it wasn't just the affair that sealed his fate. It was the forensic evidence. The DNA found at the crime scene, his fingerprints on the victim's belongings, all tied him directly to her murder. No longer could he stand in front of a congregation and preach about salvation and grace. He had been exposed for the man he truly was. The defense tried to argue. They tried to present doubt. But the evidence was too overwhelming. The prosecution's case was airtight, and the jury listened carefully to every detail, every shocking revelation. In the end, the verdict came down. Guilty. Justice has been served. The truth had prevailed. But even as the gavel fell, questions remained. How many lives had been affected by the pastor's lies? How many people would never be able to trust the man who had once stood in front of them as a pillar of faith? Do you think justice was truly served in this case? Or is there something more lurking beneath the surface that we still don't know? I want to hear your thoughts. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And if you can't get enough of gripping true crime stories like this one, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss out on the next shocking case. You don't want to miss what we have coming up next. But here's where things get even stranger. Some believe there's another person involved, someone who hasn't been caught yet. Could there be a second killer? The evidence doesn't seem to add up. Some details don't fit the pastor's narrative. And while one chapter may have closed, there are those who insist the full story has yet to be told. Click here to watch our next deep dive into another chilling case that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew.